Make the case, why should someone who's had COVID but not vaccinated get to see the Foo Fighters at Madison Square Garden?
The key thing is that if you've had COVID, you have very, very complete protection against severe disease and bad outcomes from just like the same way with the vaccine. You're protected in exactly a similar way. So why discriminate against people who have had COVID and recovered? They're protected just like the vaccine in many ways. The other thing that's important to remember, Michael, is that the COVID hasn't hit randomly in the population. It's had this sort of almost discriminatory effect. It's minorities and poor populations that have been hit harder by COVID in some ways, and they're also the more vaccine hesitant parts of the population in some cases. So in a sense, we're like discriminating against people who are sort of on the margins, but with absolutely no public health reason behind it.
You wrote that for my website, as a matter of fact. You said businesses that exclude the unvaccinated are, in effect, discriminating against the working class and the poor who have already suffered through the disease. Okay, how would this work in practical terms?
I mean, I can tell you on one side, like I think a lot of these venues, they could ask for antibody or sort of if you had an antibody level, for instance. Also, if you have had COVID, presumably you saw a doctor and learned about it or had a positive PCR test before. That should actually be enough, because if you've had COVID and recovered, then you're immune. In the same way the vaccine. So I think just asking for like a doctor's note, I think, could be enough. I mean, that would just like the same way you ask for a vaccine card is essentially a doctor's note.
Dr. Bhattacharya, maybe a naive question from me, lacking your expertise, but what if I've had COVID and don't necessarily show antibodies?
I mean, that doesn't mean that you aren't protected. In fact, quite the opposite. Antibody levels do fade, but there's other mechanisms of immune protection, T cells and other mechanisms of immune protection that last much longer than antibodies. So even though the antibody levels maybe turn negative after a few months, still you're protected again in the same way as antibodies against COVID from the vaccine. The mechanisms of immunity are actually quite similar from the vaccine and natural infection. So why are we discriminating between the two?
Do we have enough data? Do we have enough science that allows a comparison between the length of your protection by virtue of vaccination versus natural immunity, meaning you've already had COVID?
I mean, in some sense, we know, since we've had the disease longer than we've had the vaccine, we know that the natural immunity lasts at least longer than the vaccine. We don't know, of course, we haven't had more than just a year and a half experience of the disease at all. But all the other mechanisms of immunity, T cells, B cells, and whatnot, those look like they respond for quite a long time from both natural immunity and the vaccine.
Quick final question. If it's as straightforward as you've presented it, then why are policymakers, why are private entrepreneurs responsible for the type of business that we're discussing? Why haven't they adapted this position?
I'm not really sure, actually. I think partly we think about the vaccine as something we can control. You can't control if you got or didn't get the disease. But I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we really should rethink this because it doesn't make public health sense. And as I said, it discriminates against the poor and others who got the disease before and for whatever reason are vaccine hesitant.